What's going on, my fellow makers? Matt from Keep Making, and this week we'll be taking a look at quick and easy miniature bases. Let's get to it.
Shall we begin?
So for our first base, we'll be working with some water effects to make our coastal theme base. That's what we're going for. Obviously, that's how it came out looking. But yeah, let's get to it. So to start off, I'm using cork. You can get this at the dollar store. This is a great material for basing. You don't have to do any sort of water texture or feature with this. It's great for building up rocks. I've done it in a lot of my other projects. And I just stick it to the base with some super glue. After that, I'm using my own sort of, if you watch my last video in which I did a more basic sort of foliage and ground texture base, if you haven't checked that out. But so I'm just using some sort of liquid super glue, applying that to the areas where I want this texture to be. And this is sort of just tile grout mixed in with gravel and some larger stones. That's the sort of basis of all my basing sort of texture. So I decided I wanted some up top as well, and this liquid super glue really sinks into that cork. So if you just want to harden the cork, that's a good way to do it as well, but also a great way to get your textures on there. So I don't want too much texture coming off when I paint it, so I'm just taking an old brush and getting all the excess off. Now let's move on to painting. So watering down some, I think this is like a yellow brownish ochre, I couldn't see what that said there, but this orangey yellow color all over the base. So it's a little bit bright here, but don't worry, we're coming in with a wash immediately after. We're going to get some darkness in those recesses and bring out some more detail with the cork and the applied ground texture. Might not want to use your good washes for this, might opt to one of the cheaper kind. This Game Workshop stuff is pretty expensive, but whatever wash you have on hand, or even if you want to water down some brown paint, that would work as well. After that, I'm going to be going on to dry brushing. So I got a flat brush. I don't wet the brush at all. You want to apply paint directly into the brush, get most of it off, and then you're just going to be going over the raised surfaces of your piece, just like so. And that brings out some of the higher detail textures. So we go base coat, wash, and then we dry brush on a highlight. And now we have a three-tone blend. Now, again, this is a skippable step, but if you have this on hand, or you could buy some pastels and just crunch them up. I do that, you'll see a little bit later on. But this is just pigment powder. So I apply it with a makeup brush, again, bought from the dollar store. I'm sure you can find some pastels at the dollar store or some art supply craft store. I brush it on here, and then to get this to adhere and sort of go off, if you will, I'm using 50% isopropyl alcohol, rubbing alcohol type thing. Just spraying it there, and then I speed up that drying time process. You don't need to do this step, but I speed it up because I'm in a hurry here, and we get some texture as well as some color and weathering to the stone here. And it wasn't quite enough, so I applied a little bit more. Now to apply the foliage, I'm just using some Woodland Scenics fine textures, but I just use super glue here because, again, I'm in a hurry. But if you don't have super glue on hand or don't want to use it, you could definitely do this with PVA. You'll just have to wait a little bit longer for it to dry. And that's how we're looking before we add water to it. So again, that looks pretty good as just a base if you left it like that, but we will be adding some water, and to do that, this is a 5-minute epoxy. This one is $1.50 from Dollarama, so pretty cheap. You can get, obviously there's more expensive ones if you go to like a hardware store. I'm mixing the smallest amount, a little dab of paint in there. I actually go to a lighter color here as well, but we just want to use as much as we need to get that area covered. And then I honestly, you can see me here, I sort of dab a little paint in. It came out a little too opaque for me. What I normally do, again, I was rushing here, but what I normally do is take a toothpick, just dip it into the paint bottle itself, and then mix that in. That'll give you a more transparent effect that you probably want with this water, so you can see that texture that we spent our time on underneath. This one turns out fine, but if I was doing the same base again for like a display model, I would use just a tiny bit less paint so we can really get some of that texture showing through. So after it's mixed up, I mix it up for a minute, then apply it to the base, and then 5 minutes later, it's good and adhered, solid. What word am I looking for? It's good to go. 5 minute epoxy. It works for 5 minutes. So I apply that to the base. You just want to be careful here. Again, always keep your cheap brushes after they've gone to crap, because you can use them for stuff like this. And so I'm just using the brush here to get it into the areas it's not quite going into. And then from there, I apply more on and make sure it's just not spilling over the ridge. I come back later and clean those areas up. But if it spills over or you're not too careful with it, you might end up sticking your base to the table. So try to avoid that. So like I was saying before, you want to come in while it's still liquid, I guess. That's probably the wrong word. But before it's cured, that's the one. You want to come in and sort of clean up so you don't get the bumps on the outside. I end up painting the perimeter of this base at the end just because it gets a little bit bumpy there. And you can obviously clean those off with like a knife or something, but you'll have to sort of bevel the edge around the liquid. So now we want to do our waves. This is Gloss Super Heavy Gel. If you don't have this, you could use like a Mod Podge gloss. Any sort of thicker gloss gel is probably better for this, opposed to something like a PVA that has more of like a matte finish, but that would work as well, as long as it's drying translucent. So I just go in here, dip my brush straight into this product, and then I'm just laying it up in wave formation, I guess. Once that's dried, you see it dries clear here, and so we just want to add some sort of, I don't know what the word is here, a splash texture? White caps, you know, how waves look. So I'm dry brushing like I did earlier on this base, but I'm using the white and sort of stippling to get that wave texture color. You know what I'm talking about. Looks like waves. And here's how it'll turn out. Now from the ocean, we'll lower the temperature a little bit as we move on to our snowy ice theme base. Okay, so here's the icy snow base thing. I think this would be a really cool base to use on like a waterbender or like ice bender type character, storm sorceress type of thing, or maybe even like an ice wraith monster. So what I'm using here, these are shards of like broken acrylic. If you don't have those, because why would you have that? You can use these. This is like broken glass. I got this at the dollar store. I think it was like $1. And this is another piece I did with that same thing I just showed you, those glass shards. And I sort of painted them, but you could leave them transparent instead of coating over them like I did here. And you can get like a really cool ice sort of frozen effect. But I'm going to be using these acrylic shards. You could use any sort of transparent plastic as long as it sort of has those jagged edges. So to speed up the cure time of the super glue, I'm using this super glue activator. You want to be careful if you're using plastic. This activator can fog up the bottom of the plastic, or the closest place to the super glue, I should say. But because I'm covering this in snow, I wasn't too worried about that happening here. So just maybe test your plastics out before you use the activator on them to avoid that sort of fog cloudiness that occurs sometimes. So I put those in place. I broke some of them I cut with like nippers you can see off to the side there, and then I am just scratching up the base here so that the snow texture I'm about to apply will adhere properly and not just come straight off. So then we're going to be hitting these shards with another dry brush. So I'm using this light sort of icy blue, and then I come in with a pure white after that, just hitting it sort of randomly. This gives it that sort of icy look that we're going for here. now we'll move on to the snow sort of texture paste we're going to be using. So white glue, school glue, PVA glue, whatever you want to call it, soft snowflake, or any sort of very fine textured substance. I guess you could even use tile grout or whatever you need here. Just you're going to have to vary the amount of white paint you put in to offset what color that material you're using is. Anyways, I mix that with super gloss heavy gel, as well as a dab of paint, obviously, and then I add a little bit of water so that I can mold this a little bit more. That will add to the drying time, but it gives you a little bit more workability with this. So I mix it all together, and then I just apply it to the base with an older brush again. If you're doing bigger pieces, you can use it like a popsicle stick or whatever you need to apply this to your piece. The one thing I will mention here is mine came out a little bit more matte than I wanted it, so I did go in with some Mod Podge gloss afterwards to bring back some of that reflectivity which we get in snow. So to avoid that, you could put this stuff in beforehand. You could use this opposed to the super gloss heavy gel, or you could just be careful with the amount of glue and white paint you're putting in. But to go in after with the gloss, it didn't take too much time, and it came out looking really nice after. Here's how that looks. So I'm pretty happy. Again, you know, like if you had like an ice bender character in the middle of that, that would look pretty sweet. So that's what we're going for, and I think it turned out pretty cool. Now from Hoth, we'll take it way over to Dagobah as we do our swamp theme base. Now I'll be honest on this one. This one is basic as hell. I thought I would get a little bit richer sort of texture from the texture paste I'm using. So this is what I'm going for. This is a Grelin Earth from Citadel Game Workshop. But you can get it, the same sort of product in a bigger quantity. Way more bang for your buck. This whole tub was like 20 bucks. That little small one from Game Workshop is about $7. So this is crackle paste. So you apply it to your surface like so. And then you just wait for it to dry. The thicker you apply it, the bigger the cracks are supposed to be. But this one is a lot more subtle than the Games Workshop one, which dries in that sort of cracked pattern. This one honestly kind of looks like a brownie texture. If you do this on a bigger piece, it's sort of, or a different scaled piece, you sort of get more of that ground texture cracking you're looking for. But again, if you use like the Game Workshop one, that one will turn out fine. So this one I just went in with some browns, and then went in with a wash, and then a dry brush afterwards. So yeah, you can see here it doesn't look too bad, but what I would have done if I was doing this over, apply way more of this crackle paste to get a little bit more ground formation, maybe add some styrofoam and stuff underneath, or even that cork to sort of build up on and get some like more muddy textures in there. So after that, I just apply some foliage. This is actually peat moss or reindeer moss, or whatever you want to call it. You can get this at the dollar store as well. Come in big bags, and you can break it up. It can simulate weeds. You can dip it in PVA, put some foliage on it. Looks great. I just add a little static grass tuft to this one, and here's how it turned out. So yeah, definitely has the least going on of the ones we've completed here today, but you can see some of that crackle texture, and when you get the mini on there, it doesn't look too bad at all. So, and finally, we'll take it back to the medieval times, the city, as we do our cobblestone base. So for this cobblestone base, I'm going to be using a two-part epoxy, different from the one we used for the water. This one is more of a clay type texture, I guess. You can mold this, it's like a putty, I guess. So I'm scarring the base to give us some better adhesion, mixing those two pieces up. Then I wet the surface. I did some IPA here, alcohol to, that's what makes this epoxy sort of dilute, I guess is the word. Makes it, malleable, playable. You can mold it. You know what I'm saying? So I spread it across with a little stick there to roll it out flat. And then this is a texture roller. So These come in various different textures. Obviously, this one's from Green Stuff World. You can also 3D print these if you have a 3D printer at your disposal. You could also go to like a baking supply store and get them. I know they make bigger sort of textures for like cakes and stuff, but you could definitely find a Cobblestone one. Obviously, with this putty, this is Milliput, but commonly referred to as like Green Stuff, or like there's like plumber's putty, I guess you can get from like a hardware store. Same type of thing. 2 parts, you mix them together. They dry a few hours later, solid. And so here's that. I've come back a couple hours later off screen, and now I'm just going to begin painting. You could prime this as well, but I find that paint adheres pretty good to this stuff. For bases, I wouldn't. If you were sculpting detail onto a model, I would definitely prime it, but for bases it's good enough. So move forward, I'm just going to give it this like a sandy sort of base coat. Then I'm coming in with cork brown, and we're going to be doing a lot of dry brushing on this. So we want to give this a lot of variation, a lot of definition. So we're going to be very random with our dry brushing. I'm just going willy-nilly, a bunch of different colors. Give it that sort of random weathering that would happen with a cobblestone surface. So that's what you see me doing here. And then we're going to be coming in and adding some depth later on with some pigment powders. Right, so same type of product I used earlier on the coastal base. Again, you can make these yourself by just crushing up some pastels and then applying it with an older brush, or I got this cheap makeup brush from the dollar store. So I apply it all over, and then I'm coming in again with the isopropyl alcohol, just giving it a spray. That'll cure the pigment powder. Make sure you're not spraying this and getting pigment powder everywhere, because it is a little bit annoying to clean up, especially if you get it on somewhere you don't want it, like your model. So I spray this, and then I let it dry, and then once it's dry, I'm going to be taking off any excess that didn't cure with just an old flat brush. Now, if you don't have these pigment powders or pastels at your disposal, you could pull this same thing off just with a wash or some watered down brown paint. That'll go into the recesses and give you some definition here. I wanted to do the pigment powders because it gives it that a little bit of extra texture and weathering add to the mix there. And when that's done, I'm coming in with like our base coat again, and I'm doing a dry brush with that color just to bring out some of those raised areas that would sort of be getting knocked around more often with people traveling over them. And then finally, I'm coming in with the green. This is actually the pastels like I was talking. This is one that I just crushed up into very fine pieces, and you see it works just as well as the pigment powders. So I'm using this green to simulate sort of like weeds or like moss growth on this old cobblestone piece. And then again, like I do for all my other bases, I'm coating the edge with just a black paint. Now, don't skip that last step, because that gives you the clean finishing look, especially if you're playing like war games and you have a whole army. You would want to make sure you're all sort of uniform in that same way. And that's how it looks with the mini on it. Well, that'll do it for this episode, guys. Thank you so much for checking out this video. If you liked it, make sure you're hitting the thumbs up button. If you loved it, make sure you're subscribed to the channel and hitting the bell so you're notified when my videos do release. So from giant dioramas to tiny, intricate little bases, keep making.